What's the creepiest experience you have lived through? Story 1. When I was maybe 19 or 20, I nearly got run off the road on my way home from work one night. There was no actual accident, but it shook me up so badly that I pulled over on the shoulder to calm down before continuing to drive. A windowless van pulled up behind me, and a man got out and approached my car. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine, just trying to gather myself after a scare. He offered to let me wait in his van with his wife and kids, insisting multiple times that I get in. Luckily, my door was already locked, and I had only cracked the window slightly to speak with him. Since he had parked his van right behind me, I could see through my rearview mirror that there were no visible passengers inside. Story 2. I was once at my girlfriend's townhouse, and they had a backyard that shared a fence with another family, or maybe a group of families. It was a dark night, but one of those nights when the town's light reflected off the clouds, making everything eerily bright. The fence between the townhouse and their yard was old and worn, so if you really focused, you could see through the gaps. Suddenly, we heard a blood-curdling scream, "No!" followed by a gut-wrenching inhale. There were about 50 feet between the glass sliding door where we stood and the fence. Their floodlights turned on, illuminating the silhouettes of the parents crying. Through the narrow gaps, we could see the outline of a body swaying from a tree. Their son had taken his own life, and they discovered him in the dead of night when their dog ran outside and triggered the lights. We could only see their shadows and hear their pain in real time. It still gives me chills every time I think about it. Story 3. When I was 19, I was 7 months pregnant with my oldest daughter. I still lived with my parents and came home after work around 11:30 at night. I usually checked that the vehicles were locked before going inside, but that night I was suddenly overwhelmed by a deep sense of fear. I couldn't even look toward my parents' vehicles and hurried straight into the house. About 20 minutes later, a man knocked on our door, yelling that my parents' SUV was on fire and telling us to get out, which ended up saving our lives. We called 911. There had been a serial arsonist on the loose in our town, and when he was finally caught, he confessed that he had been watching me come home that night. He admitted that he had been preparing to hurt me if I had noticed him, but I never looked in his direction because he had been sitting inside my parents' SUV when I arrived. It took years before I could go out alone at night again. Story 4. I was home alone for the weekend when I was in high school, which was exciting for me because I never really had the house to myself. I had a few people over on Friday night and got really drunk. Then the next night, it was just me at home. I still had a case of beer left over and a movie to watch, so I decided that the hangover wouldn't keep me down and that I'd have an awesome night by myself. I ended up getting way too drunk and felt hungry, so I decided to cook something and started making pasta in a drunken haze, singing like a maniac as I played Master Chef in my kitchen, thinking I was amazing. Halfway through singing and stirring the sauce, I heard a tapping sound, and movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. One of the metal chains used to pull the blinds up and down on the glass doors was moving, hitting the door and making a tapping sound. I froze, watching it move back and forth on its own. Then I realized it wasn't the only one. There were 7 sets of blinds on those doors, and all 7 of the chains were moving back and forth. The hair on my arms stood up as I slowly backed away. None of the doors or windows were open, and the chains kept picking up speed, tapping louder and faster. I turned just in time to see the DVD case of the movie I was watching slide off the TV cabinet by itself. I slurred out, "Forget that," and bolted toward the door, completely freaking out. On my way out, I saw the painting near the front door. It had been moved and was tilted. I gasped, ran outside, and actually wet myself a little in the process. It felt so real, pure horror. Outside, I was shaking, horrified by what had just happened. My house was haunted. There was a ghost, and it didn't like me. Then I realized I had left the stove on and needed to go back inside to grab my phone to call for help. I psyched myself up, ran into the house, turned off the stove, ran to my room, grabbed my phone, the key, and 10 beers and bolted back out. I went to the park and started drinking again, trying to calm down. No one picked up their phones since everyone was wiped out from the night before. I vaguely remember being at the park before blacking out, then crying in my kitchen at some point, then nothing. The next morning, I woke up in my bed. For a second, I wondered if it was just a dream, but when I walked out and saw the pasta and DVD case, I realized it was real. I thought I'd have to break the news to my family that the house was haunted and that we'd need to move. Then I went on Facebook and saw status after status about a minor earthquake that had happened that night. Needless to say, I felt like an idiot, but it was the first earthquake I'd ever experienced, and we don't usually get them where I live. Story 5, I had a similar experience once with my brother's friend. His name was B, and we were meeting up at the local Abbey's parking lot to say hi to some friends, because that's just what you do in a small town. When we left, we drove through the small neighborhood behind the pizza place. We came up to a four-way stop and stopped like normal, but just as we started to pull through, a man in a huge truck blew through the stop sign and almost hit us. We were shaken, but brushed it off as an accident and kept driving. About a mile down the road, B noticed the guy was still behind us. Thinking it was just a coincidence, he took a random turn to loop around, but the man followed us. He kept driving dangerously close behind, acting like he was going to hit us. We started heading toward the police station but turned into another neighborhood to try to lose him. Unfortunately, we took a wrong turn onto a dead-end street, and the man blocked us in. He got out of his truck, screaming and demanding we get out of the car. He kept walking back to his truck, yelling that he was going to teach us a real lesson. I called the police and stayed on the phone, terrified. It took them 20 minutes to arrive while the man kept escalating, pounding on the windows, and threatening to shoot us every time he came close. I have no doubt he would have followed through if the police hadn't shown up when they did. It was one of the most terrifying nights of my life, and I'm still so grateful we made it out safely. Story 6. My parents told me they would be home in 30 minutes. They were completely lying. They were actually about 2 hours away. When the 35 minutes went by, someone knocked on the door, and I just opened it without thinking. They shoved the door open, but luckily I had forgotten to unlatch it. It was a woman and a really rough-looking man. I slammed the door shut and locked the deadbolt. They started yelling that they needed to use my phone immediately because her kids had supposedly been abducted. I called the police, but she kept demanding that I come outside and let her use the phone. Luckily, I live about 60 seconds away from a police station, and within a minute, 4 police cars were outside. The man had a weapon and was just trying to force his way into the house. It was terrifying. Having the police station so close has saved me more than once. Another time, 2 guys tried to break in through the back window. I called the cops again, and in less than a minute, I saw flashlights all over the yard. They even had to call in a helicopter because the men jumped a few fences trying to get away. Story 7. I was living alone on a fairly quiet back street in a large city. One night, I was in bed when I heard a woman screaming outside, a deep, raw scream like she was terrified for her life. It happened a couple of times, so I got up to look out the window. I lived on the 5th floor of a large apartment building. I looked around, expecting to see others reacting, but no one else seemed concerned. Then it happened again, louder, and it sounded like it was coming from directly below my window. There was a small enclosed parking lot down there, but it was pitch dark. I shone my phone's flashlight down but couldn't see anything. I considered calling the police. Then it happened again, even louder, and I made a split-second decision to go down there. I rushed down, my heart pounding, already half regretting it, and crept around to the back of the building where the screams had come from. I shouted, "Hey!" as loud as I could, trying to sound intimidating. Nothing. My heart was racing, my hands were shaking, adrenaline pumping. I turned on my phone flashlight and scanned the area. Nothing moved until suddenly 2 foxes darted out from behind one of the cars. I watched them run off down the street, feeling a massive wave of relief. I went back upstairs and searched online, and sure enough, the sound foxes make when they fight or mate really does sound like someone being tortured or burned alive. It's horrifying to hear in the middle of the night if you don't know what it is. Story 8. When I was about 6 years old, my parents dropped me off at a swimming lesson. This was in China more than 2 decades ago, and I remember the class being packed with students. I was terrified of the water and didn't want to get in, which made the instructor frustrated. He ended up throwing me into the deep end. I can still clearly remember the panic, the choking, the burning in my lungs, the feeling of sinking deeper as I gasped and swallowed water. It felt like forever before the teacher finally shoved a long pole into the water for me to grab and pulled me out. I remember the edges of my vision going dark as I tried to breathe. For years afterward, I was terrified of water touching my face. Showering was a nightmare. I would take a deep breath, duck under the water just long enough to scrub my hair as fast as possible, and jump out, my heart racing every time on the edge of a panic attack. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that this story came up again during a family visit. My grandmother told me that when my grandfather found out what had happened, he was so furious that he called in favors from his old army buddies, literally revolutionary soldiers from the days of Mao To, go to that swimming school with high-ranking officials and scare the life out of that teacher. Story 9. The campus house I lived in had a disturbing history. There had been Suics, past owners had died there, and it was incredibly old. I stayed there alone all summer because of my job in my college town, and every single night I would hear strange noises. When my roommates were still around, I used to assume it was just them, but now that I was alone, I knew it wasn't. I heard weird things almost every night. The very first day I arrived, I went upstairs to my room, and the second I reached the top of the stairs, I heard a door slam downstairs. Throughout the summer, I kept hearing footsteps, doors creaking, and other noises. I was convinced and still believe to this day that there was a squatter who somehow managed to avoid me all summer. Sometimes the front door would be unlocked in the morning, even though I vividly remembered locking it the night before. I'd double-check it every night, tugging the handle to make sure it was secure, only to find it open the next day. Maintenance would occasionally let themselves in, but every time I called, they swore they hadn't been there. The creepiest thing was the attic door. It was a regular door, not one of those pull-down kinds. Some mornings it would be slightly open. I'd close it, even put a chair in front of it. Yet somehow it would still end up slightly open again. One weekend, a roommate came to stay while I was gone, and he said he heard loud banging throughout the night. At one point, I actually yelled, "If there's anyone squatting here, I don't care. You can stay, just let me know and we'll set some ground rules." I thought I heard a faint rustling from the basement, but never saw anyone. Honestly, if there really had been a squatter, I probably wouldn't have minded much. It was the college's property anyway, and as long as they weren't dangerous, I'd have been fine sharing the space for the summer. Story 10. It wasn't supernatural or strange, but I was with my dad when he passed away. He had sarcoma, a rare form of cancer, and near the end, his body started shutting down. He had been in a medically induced coma for the final week of his life, and my mother eventually made the heartbreaking decision to remove life support when it was clear the cancer had taken over completely. In that small hospital room, it was my mother, my older sister, 4 of my dad's closest relatives, a doctor, a nurse, a woman performing the last rites, and me. The room was quiet except for soft crying and the woman's voice reading the prayers. My dad's face turned a purplish blue shade, and his body trembled lightly before everything went still. It was over in just a couple of minutes. I was 17 at the time, probably too numb to grasp everything fully, but even now at 24, that memory still lingers more deeply than I ever expected. Story 11. My sister had been telling me for years that something terrible would happen to her in 2020. She had a little girl in 2017 and used to say she had the baby for me since I don't have children. In 2019, our father passed away, and she and he were not on good terms. Our mother had also died estranged from her, which made everything worse. I had been the one to care for both of our parents. Then the pandemic happened, and her son was surely assaulted. In April, our uncle's baby brother, one of the best men I've ever known, died, and we were devastated. By June, we started noticing her strange behavior, and within a week, she spiraled into a full manic episode. Before all this, she had been incredibly bright but unbelievably stubborn, so when her mental state worsened, she refused to seek help. We had her committed several times, but nothing worked. She's been arrested, hospitalized, and placed under psychiatric care by police, but she keeps deteriorating. Now she lives in a completely different reality, detached from us. The most heartbreaking part is that she has documented every stage of her breakdown on Facebook since June. Watching her lose herself through her own posts is terrifying. It still haunts me because our brother has the same mental health condition, and it's horrifying how quickly a mind can turn against itself. Story 12. Back in June, my boyfriend and I went camping at a spot we had visited many times before. It was a remote area with campsites spaced about 400 feet apart, separated by trees. There was no cell service, and the nearest ranger station was about a 30-minute drive away. Since it was bear country, I always kept my bear spray on my hip. My boyfriend informed me that he had forgotten our gun at home. He hadn't noticed the box sitting out with the rest of our gear, so all we had for protection was the bear spray. We had a peaceful evening and went to sleep in our tent with our dog. My Subaru was parked perpendicular to the tent opening, forming a kind of barrier in front of our site. I woke up while it was still dark to my boyfriend whispering urgently, "Get the bear spray now." Half asleep, I mumbled, "Oh no, is there a bear?" and grabbed the bear spray. I was honestly a little excited at the thought of seeing one, but then my boyfriend said something that made my blood run cold. "No, it's a person." He later told me he had woken up to the sound of a door handle jiggling. He and the dog had looked at each other in confusion before he unzipped the tent slightly to peek out. Just before dawn, he saw movement outside, and then he started yelling something totally out of character for him. He bellowed, "Get out of here! Go! Get out!" At first, I thought he must be yelling at an animal. I clutched our 40-pound whippet mix in my arms. She was shaking and cowering, definitely not a guard dog. I stuck my head out of the tent beside him and saw, just 10 feet away, a huge man crouched next to my car, dressed all in black. He was poorly hiding behind it. My boyfriend kept shouting at him, but the man didn't move. Then he stood up and just stared at us. There was no one else around, and he had clearly heard us mention the bear spray, so he probably knew we didn't have a gun. I stuck the bear spray out the tent door and shouted in my angriest voice, "Do you want to get sprayed? Leave now!" I might be a 5'4" woman, but I was furious and terrified. The man finally started backing away slowly. He didn't seem to have a weapon, but something about his body language was deeply unsettling, like he knew we couldn't stop him if he decided to come closer. He was tall, at least 6'3" and bulky. As he walked away down the road, my boyfriend and I scrambled to pack up everything. We tore down camp in 15 minutes flat, constantly watching him. He moved with a strange, swaying motion, his arms swinging loosely as he walked. I'm a nurse, and from his behavior, I was almost certain he was on meth. His twitchy movements, the way he thought he was hidden when he clearly wasn't, and his complete lack of fear all fit the pattern. He disappeared into the trees for a moment while we finished packing, but when I looked up again, he was walking back toward us, dragging a huge branch behind him. He was about 10 feet away when I saw him. I had stupidly left my bear spray in the car. I backed up slowly as he stopped in front of me, standing at the entrance to our site, staring. His expression was pure malice. Without breaking eye contact, he dropped the branch across the entrance, blocking our exit, then walked off down the road before cutting back into the forest behind our site. My heart was pounding as I ran to grab my dog, who was tied up near the back of the site, terrified that someone else might come out of the trees. I threw her into the car, shaking, and my boyfriend jumped out to move the branch. As we drove away, we noticed more branches and logs placed across the road. Half-hearted attempts to block the way, like he thought it would slow us down. My boyfriend quickly got out several times to move debris, and we finally made it back to the main road. We honked the horn the whole way out to wake up any other campers who might be nearby. We drove to the highway, finally got cell service, and called 911. They took our report and said they'd send someone out, but I doubted they'd ever find him. I still don't know who that man was or what his intentions were, but I can't forget the way he looked at me. It was pure menace. My boyfriend and I will never go camping again without our gun. Story 13. My dad used to wake me up in the middle of the night to confront me about things I hadn't done correctly or hadn't completed to his standards. That alone was terrifying, but what made it worse was his violent temper. More than once, he threatened to push me out of my third-story bedroom window, and a couple of times, he actually tried. He also strangled me until I blacked out, though I think he always knew when to stop. It became such a regular occurrence that I started waking up on my own around the time he would usually come storming in, lying there in the dark, heart pounding, unable to breathe from the anxiety, waiting for it to happen. When I reached high school, I finally started fighting back, yelling, pushing him when he got too close. It only made things worse at first. One night, he pushed me off the third-floor staircase banister. But that same night, I grabbed a clothes hanger and told him if he ever touched me again, I would fight back. That week, I finally went to school and told a teacher. They called the police, which at the time made me furious because I just wanted it to stop quietly. Looking back, though, I am forever grateful to that teacher. They may have saved my life. Story 14. This isn't paranormal, but it's something I'll never forget from living with my father, who was a recovering alcoholic. My whole life he struggled with hard liquor and had a hard time quitting. He'd been in and out of rehab, and whenever that happened, I'd be sent to stay with caretakers, some of whom were abusive. Determined to avoid that, he tried quitting on his own this time. He worked at the Salvation Army, so if they caught him drinking, he would be fired. He lied a lot back then, so I never really knew the full truth about what he was doing. This was the first time I ever saw someone go through serious withdrawal, and I didn't understand it at the time. The first stage happened during a Salvation Army event for recovering addicts. We were eating with others, and I watched him struggle just to get food into his mouth. His hands were shaking so badly that he finally gave up. As days went by, he became more irritable. The second stage came when I woke up one night and heard him talking to our neighbor, Carol, or so I thought. He carried on a full conversation, but when I looked, no one was there. He wasn't on the phone either. Then came the third stage, the worst of all. We were sitting outside by the apartment pool one night when he looked up at the trees and asked me if I could see them. "See what?" I said. He pointed and said, "The bobcats in the trees." He was hallucinating, completely convinced they were real. He saw other things too, but that's the one that stuck with me. The final straw was the morning he decided to ride my bike to the store. He made it maybe 20 feet before collapsing and knocking himself out on a set of stairs. I was too scared to go outside, but some neighbors helped him. He was totally disoriented and didn't know what was happening. I was 15 and had never seen my dad like that before. He had been a mathematical genius and an electrician journeyman, but now he was falling apart. He was hospitalized for a long time after that, and I stayed with a friend. Sadly, he started drinking again later on and passed away 7 years later from liver and kidney failure. Story 15, I was out eating with my family when my dad, who is normally calm, suddenly yelled, "Holy!" and went completely pale right as he was about to take a bite of his usual Cubano sandwich. I asked what was wrong, and he stammered that someone had just fallen. I turned around and saw a man lying motionless on the pavement across the street. Without thinking, I ran out of the restaurant and crossed without even looking for traffic. I was lucky not to be hit by a car, but when I reached him, it was already too late. He was dead. Blood was pouring from his head, mouth, and nose. I shouted at him, trying to get a response, but there was nothing. I turned away and called 911. Either someone had already called or a fire truck happened to be nearby, because emergency responders arrived within minutes. They rushed over, but it was useless. They covered him with a white sheet almost immediately. A week later, a detective called me. They ruled out suicide. It might have been an accident or even a homicide. He had fallen from the 5th floor right around dinner time. I saw his face in my mind for weeks after that. I never went back to that restaurant again. The worst part was how his bloodstain remained faintly visible on the pavement for months, while people walked right over it, unaware. The red tape clinging to the pole beside it slowly peeled away in the weather, and no one ever left flowers for him. Sometimes I still wonder if he could hear me screaming at him, or if he was already gone. Story 16. It was 7th or 8th grade, and school had just let out during a heavy rainstorm. I walked to the church parking lot next to the school, where my mom usually picked me up. There were several cars waiting, but hers wasn't in the usual spot, so I stood there texting her to see where she was. That's when a man I didn't know called out to me from his van, asking if I wanted to get inside to stay dry. I had never seen him before, and there were no kids or anyone else in the van. I told him no, that I was fine, but he asked again. I repeated no and started walking away just as my mom texted me her location. I never told anyone at the time. I figured he might have just driven off, but looking back, I should have said something. It still gives me chills to think about what could have happened. You don't ask a random kid to get in your car like that. At the time, I lived in a pretty safe area, and no kids went missing, so thankfully no one else fell for it. But it still bothers me that I didn't report it. Story 17. One night someone tried to break into our house. My kids were asleep, and I was doing laundry in the back of the house. As I moved between rooms, someone must have seen me through the kitchen window. I started feeling vibrations and hearing pounding noises. At first I thought one of my kids was up and moving around, so I checked, but they were fast asleep. Then I heard it again. Loud, deliberate banging, moving from one door to another. We have two back doors, one in the bedroom and one in the laundry room, and whoever it was started kicking and pounding on them. I panicked, and instead of calling 911, called my husband. He reminded me that we had a gun, but it was in my car, which was parked in the open garage. I was terrified, but I decided to go for it. As soon as I opened my car door to grab the gun, the man came around the corner of the house, right in front of the garage. He didn't see the gun, but he heard me cock it and immediately started panicking, shouting that someone was after him and he just needed a place to hide. I guess my husband had already called the police because they showed up just then, me standing there, shaking, pointing the gun at the intruder. He's lucky the cops arrived when they did, and that I was too scared to shoot, because that night could have ended very differently. Before that incident, I was completely against having guns in the house. Afterward, I got my concealed handgun license, and now we keep one gun in the car and another inside the house. Story 18. All throughout my childhood, whenever I slept in my parents' room, I always needed the closet door shut. If it wasn't, I would see shadowy figures moving through it, slowly, like silhouettes walking behind the door. They'd disappear if I shut my eyes, but the moment I opened them again, the shapes were back. It terrified me. Fast forward to high school. Our house had been remodeled, and part of my bedroom now occupied the exact spot where that closet used to be. During my junior year, we got a new dog. He would sleep anywhere in the house, except my room. Whenever I tried to keep him in there at night, he'd stand frozen in the middle of the room, staring directly at that corner where the closet once was, whining uncontrollably. He wouldn't calm down until I let him out. Around that same time, I began hearing scratching sounds from that corner. People would probably say it was just a mouse or a bird in the wall, but these scratches were deeper, heavier, like something much larger was making them. The noises eventually stopped, but that corner still gives me chills. I hope whatever was there never comes back. Story 19. My father was deployed with the United Nations in Sierra Leone during the Civil War more than 20 years ago. If you know anything about that conflict, you can imagine the kind of horror he must have witnessed. Growing up, my father wasn't an addict or an alcoholic, but something inside him had broken. He kept it buried most of the time, but when his anger came out, it was frightening. Once, when I was 11 years old and being a brat as kids or sometimes, he snapped. He grabbed me by the neck and screamed about how he had taken countless lives in Africa, how he had killed child soldiers younger than me, and how my life could be snuffed out in an instant if I didn't learn respect. The worst part was the pride in his voice as he said it. He told me he was 3 times the man I'd ever be. I still remember the date, February 15th, 2014, because that night I promised myself I'd prove him wrong someday. It took me years to realize I never had to. I wasn't the one who needed to change. He was. Story 20. A few years ago, I ate some really old fish. It was pickled herring and vinegar, so it didn't look or smell too bad, but something about the taste was off. My mom insisted it was fine and told me to eat it, so I did. A few hours later, I felt dizzy and had to lie down. I slept through the night but woke up still sick. By the next morning, I could barely move. I couldn't eat or drink anything, but I thought rest would fix it. Instead, I woke up vomiting nonstop, the world spinning like I had downed 2 bottles of vodka. My mom rushed me to the hospital, but it took time to get there. I hadn't had water in over 30 hours. I was dehydrated, throwing up out the car window, my arms and legs cramping so badly I couldn't even hold my head up. It just hung there. I could barely speak. I'd never felt that sick in my life, and somewhere along the way, I accepted that I was dying. The thought didn't scare me. It almost felt peaceful, like I was relieved the pain would finally end. That part still haunts me, the calm acceptance of dying. Spoiler, I survived. My mom got me to the hospital and they started IV fluids. I spent 4 days vomiting and another week too weak to stand for long. For 2 more weeks, I stayed dizzy, sometimes collapsing just from the extra weight of my wet hair after a shower. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, and it made me realize how close I had come to never waking up again. Story 21. When my ex-husband finally got clean, I truly believed everything would be okay. We moved into a small studio apartment with our new baby. It was built in someone's backyard, which should have been a red flag. But I ignored it because I was just grateful he seemed to be changing. It didn't last long. Before I knew it, I wasn't allowed to have a phone, money, or a job. I wasn't even allowed to walk down the street to use the Wi-Fi at his workplace or to visit my grandmother who lived right across the road. It became a full-blown hostage situation. We fought constantly and it often turned violent. He destroyed the only photo I had of my grandfather, my hero. He hurt me repeatedly and I even caught him hurting our infant son. I'm convinced he tried to poison him once. He split my head open with a remote control, threw glass at me and cut my legs. He refused to let me clean up afterward, probably so I couldn't call the police or Child Protective Services. The one time I did call, the police made me leave for the night with nowhere to go. And the landlord was furious, probably because he didn't have the right permits for the apartment. I wasn't allowed to buy groceries and sometimes my baby's bottle was just boiled apples and potatoes. I began hurting myself, tried to end my life more than once, and completely lost my faith in everything. I was losing my mind. It wasn't until I finally grabbed my son and whatever I could carry and walked away that I was truly free. Homelessness was better than being trapped with him. Later, when I looked through my old notebooks and journals, I was horrified. They were filled with rambling nonsense and excuses for why I stayed. I had normalized the abuse without even realizing it. I still can't believe I survived. I don't know how I got out, but I did. I don't know where he is now, and I don't want to know. Today, after years of therapy and healing, I'm finally happy. I've dealt with the guilt of exposing my son to that situation, the night terrors, and the sleep paralysis. My son is in first grade now. He's tall, polite, funny, and smart. I think he saved my life because during those dark days, he was the reason I held on. I have another child now, I'm remarried, and life is finally how it should have been all along. Story 22. This isn't the most horrifying thing I've experienced, but it's something that still sticks with me. Last year after school, my friend and I went to get pizza before practice, like we always did. While we were sitting there, a new kid walked up to us and asked if he could sit and hang out. He said he had just moved here from another town, so we told him sure. He seemed nice, and we talked for a bit before realizing it was time to go. The pizza place was just a short walk from school, so we said goodbye and left for practice. The next day, we saw him during lunch and waved. This went on for about a week, just friendly hellos in the hallway. Then one day, I decided to skip pizza and go home before practice. I took a nap since practice wasn't until 6. When I woke up, I had 6 missed calls and over 50 messages from my friends, our cheer group chat, and my coach. My phone was still buzzing. My coach was calling. When I answered, I asked what was happening, and she told me there had been a stabbing at the pizza place we always went to. I froze. She asked where my friend was, and I told her I didn't know. I called my friend immediately, terrified, but thankfully she wasn't there either. Still, the fear lingered. That evening at practice, no one said much. The atmosphere was heavy. Later that night, my mom told me the name of the person who had been stabbed. It was the same boy who had just moved to our town, the one who had asked to be our friend. He passed away that night. For months afterward, the hallways at school were quiet. It was eerie, like the whole building was mourning. Story 23. After 10 years in an abusive relationship, I finally left with my children. The day I escaped, he told me he would find me, kill me, and take my kids somewhere no one would ever find them. The police warned me that they couldn't guarantee our safety, so we fled again. By that point, we had already moved 4 times because he kept finding us. This time, we went more than 3,000 kilometers away to a new housing development so recent it wasn't even on maps or GPS. Emergency services had to physically map the area because the streets didn't exist in their system yet. My duplex didn't even look like it existed. It was hidden down the side of another house, through a gate behind a garage. We chose that place because it was nearly impossible to find. One night around 10, I was outside hanging sheets because my child had wet the bed again. The clothesline was right next to the 6-foot gate that sealed off the yard, which looked like the rear entrance to another property. There was only a small hole for a hand to reach through and unlatch it. As I was hanging the bedding, a cold wave of fear came over me, so strong it nearly paralyzed me. I turned toward the gate and froze. Through the hole I saw a black-gloved hand pull away, and the gate slowly started to open. I said out loud, "No!" My eyes adjusted, and I saw the tip of a black shoe just inside the opening. My house door was right behind me, so I backed up slowly, saying I was going to get the dog. I didn't have one then, but I wanted whoever it was to think I did. I slipped inside, locked the door, and called the police. They arrived in under 2 minutes. When I first moved there, they had flagged my number and address for immediate emergency response because of my history. The officers searched the property but found nothing. They figured the person had run off down the laneway about 4 houses away. They patrolled my street every night for the next month. Around that same time, my ex missed his scheduled phone calls to the kids for an entire week, which was strange. 2 days later, he finally called and casually mentioned that he was sorry he hadn't called earlier, saying he had just flown back into the main city. That made no sense. He was unemployed, living in a rural area, and had no reason to fly anywhere, especially not to that city unless he had been coming from another state. I had a sick feeling it was him. The police agreed. 2 weeks later, when I went to the station to register my protection order in that state, the officers asked me to apply for security upgrades to my home. That's when I learned their suspicion had grown. They had found out he had actually bought plane tickets for that exact day and boarded the flight. After his arrival, he vanished. They also uncovered messages between him and a relative discussing plans to kill me once he found me. They wouldn't tell me the details, but they confirmed enough for me to know I had narrowly escaped something terrible. To this day, I don't know why he didn't push through the gate that night. Maybe seeing me outside ruined whatever plan he had. Maybe my mention of a dog scared him off. Either way, I believe that bluff saved my life, and so did the police's quick response. It's been 6 years now. We've moved twice more since then. Somehow, he always finds us again. Most recently through a police records mistake. I'm done running. This is my life now. Constantly on alert, always watching, but alive. Story 24. Mine is a little different because it doesn't involve anyone doing something evil, just nature being terrifying. I was about 10, living with my aunt and my 2 younger cousins. The littlest was barely 3. One afternoon around 4:30 or 5, my aunt decided to run to the store for cigarettes. The convenience store was so close I could have biked there and back in under 20 minutes. It was a calm, sunny day, and everything seemed normal. We knew all our neighbors, so there was nothing to worry about. But not 10 minutes after she left, the entire sky turned black. My aunt had a fan in her upstairs bedroom window that had 2 sets of blades, one to pull air in and one to push it out. Suddenly, it started making this awful grinding sound. My cousin, who was about 7, and I ran in and saw both sets of blades spinning in the same direction, straining the motor. We tried to pull the fan out so we could close the window, but as soon as we lifted it, a violent gust of wind slammed it into us and knocked us down. The sky went completely dark, rain poured down in sheets, and I heard that unmistakable sound of freight train. My stomach dropped. I knew it was a tornado. I grabbed my cousins and pulled them to the lowest level of the tri-level house, huddling with them in a hallway. The sound was deafening. It truly did sound like a train tearing through the house. The windows rattled and hail slammed against the walls. We were all crying. Then the youngest cousin started screaming that his mom was knocking on the door. I told him it was just the hail, but he broke free, ran upstairs and opened it. He was right, it was our aunt. She rushed inside, grabbed him, and carried him back down to us. Just moments later, a massive tree branch shattered the living room window near the door. If he hadn't opened it when he did, the branch might have killed her. The storm lasted only 20 or 30 minutes, but it felt endless. When it passed, the sun came out again, but our roof was ripped off the garage, and the living room floor was covered in 6 inches of hail and debris. It's been years, but I still get panic attacks whenever there's a tornado warning or a storm that feels too strong. Story 25. When I was around 19, my girlfriend's mom had a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. My girlfriend had been through hell in the months before. She'd been assaulted at a party, her 14-year-old dog had died, and her grandfather had passed away. It was just one tragedy after another. We were in the hospital waiting room, and she was sobbing, saying the world hated her and that everything she loved was being taken away. I didn't know what to say. I just kept telling her it would be okay, trying to comfort her in the only way I knew how. Eventually, she whispered that she just needed a hug. So I hugged her gently, patted her on the back, and told her, "It's okay, everything will be all right." That was when something inside her completely broke. She screamed an ear-splitting, blood-curdling scream, and before I could react, she kicked me hard in the groin. I collapsed to the floor, and she started hitting and kicking me over and over. I tried to get up, but she punched me again. I'd been raised by a single mom who taught me never to hit a woman, so I didn't fight back. I just tried to shield myself as she kept going. It felt like forever before anyone came. I was crawling, gasping for breath, covered in bruises, when a doctor and nurse finally ran in. I remember reaching toward them, trying to call for help, but I couldn't even speak. I coughed up blood as they rushed to stop her. She was taken away, and the doctor checked me over. I had a dozen large bruises, some the size of her entire foot scrapes from being dragged across the floor, a few small fractures in my arm and ribs, a bloody nose, and some internal bleeding. One bruise was right on my windpipe, and the doctor said if she had hit just a little harder, I might have died. He treated me quietly and didn't even bill me for most of it, just the x-rays. The police questioned both of us, and I chose not to press charges. When I saw her again, she just started sobbing and ran off. Later, her best friend told me the reason for her reaction, that what I'd said and done reminded her of how her rapist had held her and whispered those same words just before assaulting her 2 weeks earlier. I had no idea. I never blamed her after that. I just felt heartbroken that she was in that much pain. Story 26. Several years ago, I was at home when I smelled an awful, God-forsaken odor. I looked around the house and couldn't find anything, so I went outside and walked around. When I got to the backyard, I saw that an apartment across the road was on fire. I ran over and saw that there was a car in the parking spot. Each spot had the corresponding apartment number painted on it, so I tried to open the front door. It wouldn't open, so I kicked it in and went inside. The smoke was thick and black, burning my eyes and nose until they poured like someone had turned on a faucet. I managed to pull a woman out, but I saw toys scattered everywhere, so I went back in. I could hear sirens as I re-entered the apartment. I searched the kitchen and living room but couldn't find the child, so I went upstairs. That's when I lost the ability to take a deep breath. Everything I touched was scorching, and I could barely see through the darkness. Every breath felt like inhaling fire. I crawled across the bedroom floor until my hand brushed against a leg. I was coughing so hard I was almost vomiting with each breath, but I grabbed the child by her leg, pulled her into the hallway, and lifted her up. By then, my vision was fading, black holes surrounded by flashing yellow and white rings. My ears were ringing so loudly I could only hear my heart hammering and my own choking coughs. I tried to get downstairs with the child in my arms and made it down the first 2 steps. The firefighters later told me I had fallen, though I don't remember it. I woke up with a broken collarbone, a fractured jaw, and severe smoke inhalation. The doctors told me they didn't know how I'd survived, and all of it had been for nothing. The little girl had died from smoke inhalation, and her mother had died of a hero overdose. From what investigators could tell, the child had been playing with her mother's kit and accidentally set the comforter on fire. I almost died trying to save 2 people who were already gone. Story 27. In 2017, I had recently dropped out of college because I was drowning in depression. I started hanging out with friends who seemed supportive, but really just fueled my worst impulses. We started doing all kinds of substances, LSD, ecstasy, painkillers. We convinced ourselves that if we were careful, nothing bad would happen. Meanwhile, our bodies were being destroyed. After months of this, I accidentally overdosed on ecstasy. I was home alone and realized what was happening long before it got bad. I couldn't stand because everything turned blurry and purple. For some reason I can't explain, I called an Uber to take me to the emergency room. That poor driver unknowingly rushed a dying 19-year-old to the hospital. They wheeled me into a room, hooked me up to an IV, and doctors started asking questions I couldn't answer. Their voices sounded distant and muffled. All I could see was white light from the fluorescent bulbs. My body shook violently like I was seizing. My heart felt like it would explode. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even make a fist. My muscles buzzed like pop rocks under my skin, nerves firing nonstop. I felt both hot and freezing. My mind was fully aware, and I was terrified. I thought, this is how I die, and my family will have to live with it. I begged the universe to let me live. I didn't want to die like this. Then the pain faded. My vision went black. My body felt calm. I could still faintly hear the doctors talking. A nurse adjusted my IV and said she'd check on me soon. I whispered, wait, and when she asked what I needed, I said, please stay. I don't want to die alone. I heard a chair scrape and then felt her hand in mine. She held it until I finally drifted into real sleep. I never saw her face, never got to thank her. When I woke up, I was alive. They sent me home later that day. Eventually, I told my mom, then my dad, then my sisters. Since then, I've grown closer to my family than ever. I'm healthier, stronger, and though I still struggle with depression, I'm alive, and that's enough. Story 28. When I was about 12, my mom and I stayed at my grandfather's house for the weekend. He was in a wheelchair and went to bed early. Later, my mom and I went to the room we shared. She asked me to turn off the TV because she couldn't sleep with the noise. I wasn't tired yet and hated being in total silence, but I did it anyway and laid down facing the dark screen. About 15 to 45 minutes later, I heard the distinct click of the hallway light switch, and suddenly the hallway filled with light. I could see everything reflected in the TV screen, but there was no one there. The switch was right next to my grandfather's bedroom door, and I would have heard his wheelchair if he had gotten up to use the bathroom. The silence made my heart race. After about a minute and a half, the switch clicked again, and the hallway went dark. I couldn't move. I lay frozen, convinced that if I made a sound or shifted even a little, whatever had turned the light on would notice me. The next morning I told my mom, and she insisted it was probably my grandfather, but I know it wasn't. I would have heard him moving. His wheelchair always made a distinct sound on the floor. There was no one in that hallway that night. Story 29. Back in the early 1990s when I was a kid, our family home had a driveway with a gate framed by two large stone eagle statues. It was in a quiet little Yorkshire town where you might see a car pass by once every half hour. One morning we woke up to find that one of the eagles was gone. There was no sign of damage, just a perfectly smooth surface where it had been removed and not a single piece of debris left behind. The gate wasn't far from the house, and it was such a still area that any noise should have been heard. Yet no one heard a thing. It was strange. Nearly a week later, a neighbor from down the road showed up saying he'd found our missing eagle at the bottom of his skip. He brought it back completely intact with the same flawless cut, even stranger. A few days later, I was sitting on my windowsill overlooking the front of the house when I saw a black stretch limousine turn onto our street. In the middle of the afternoon, that alone was odd enough. It stopped right outside our gate, and a man stepped out. He looked like he belonged in another century, dressed in an old-fashioned chauffeur's uniform, complete with gloves and one of those round driver's hats, which he removed as soon as he got out. He was completely bald. Even his eyebrows were missing. He walked up to the gate post where the eagle had been, ran his hands slowly over the smooth spot, looked around for a while, then got back into the limo and drove off. I can still picture it clearly. To this day, it remains one of the strangest, most unsettling things I've ever witnessed. Story 30. I grew up in a small town where there wasn't much for teenagers to do. One hobby I picked up from my parents was visiting antique stores and exploring all the strange, fascinating old items. During my senior year of high school, I went into a big antique shop and came across a Ouija board from the 1970s or 80s. I was skeptical and agnostic at the time, but I thought it would be fun to try with friends. Nothing strange happened, except that soon after I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. The next year I went off to college and brought the board with me. One night, my friend and I convinced a few girls from his dorm to use it in a small cemetery on campus, where the original landowners from the early 1800s were buried. That night, I stashed the board under my bed and went to sleep. As I was drifting off, I kept seeing flashes of skulls flying toward me, those vivid half-dream, half-awake visions that happen before real sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I jolted awake from a nightmare, completely frozen, unable to move. I could feel what seemed like 2 long, heavy arms lifting off my chest and sliding underneath my bed. When I finally could move again, I looked beneath the bed, and there was the Ouija board. Terrified, I decided to go to the 24-hour campus library. As I stepped into the hallway, my neighbor came out of his room. I told him what had happened, and he offered to walk around my room holding a picture of the Virgin Mary that he said had been blessed by a holy man in Mexico. I didn't believe in that kind of thing, but I agreed because I was scared out of my mind. The next day, I gave the board to him. I didn't want it anywhere near me. A couple of years later, I ran into that same neighbor at a bar. After catching up, he asked, "Do you remember that Ouija board you gave me?" I took it home and gave it to my mom. She said weird things started happening, lights turning on and off, strange noises, so she burned it. It may sound anticlimactic, but that entire year I had that board. My life was filled with bad luck and unease. I'm still skeptical, but after that, I'm a lot more open-minded about the supernatural, and I'll never touch another Ouija board again. Story 31. About 10 years ago, I lived in a very small country town in the Japanese countryside. I was not native to Japan. It was the night of one of the town's annual celebrations, which meant absolutely everyone would be out partying and drinking. I enjoyed the evening festivities with my husband and our 2 young children. Afterwards, my family went home while I joined a friend for karaoke and a drink. We stayed out very late, long after everyone had gone. We parted ways at the bar, and I realized I had no way to get home except to walk. There were no taxis. My husband was asleep, so he was not answering his phone. It was only a little over a mile to my house, but it was entirely in the dark. We were quite literally the only white foreign family who lived in the entire area, so everyone knew me. I stuck out like a sore thumb. I often got unwanted attention from drunk men simply for being different, and I had to walk through a park past a large Shinto temple to get home. That place was incredibly creepy. There were no streetlights, and I could hardly see in front of me. It was one of the dumbest things I had ever done. I prayed under my breath the whole way that I would be safe. Every time the wind blew through the trees and rustled the leaves, it sent shivers up my spine. When I finally made it home, I swore I would never be that careless again. Story 32, I lived in Cairo for a year and a half, from the middle of 2012 to the end of 2013, while I studied at the American University in Cairo. It was a difficult place to live, but I was adaptable and learned the basic geography of Cairo. Basic is relative, because when you look at a map, there seems to be no real urban planning at all. Toward the end of my time there, my sister came to visit. We went to the pyramids. It was my second time, and to Jordan to see Petra, which was incredible. Back in Cairo, we went to Zamalek for dinner and grabbed a taxi to my apartment in Doki. I had taken many taxis by then and had been ripped off a few times, but I had never had a truly awful ride. This driver seemed fine at first, listening to music, but as he crossed the bridge from Zamalek into Giza, he missed the exit that would take us onto the Corniche El Nil toward Doki. My gut told me to tell him to take the next exit, turn around, and go back, but I assumed it was an honest mistake. Suddenly, he was driving out of town toward October 6th City. I did not know where he was taking us. It was night and the city lights were receding. My sister was in the back seat and I worried about what might happen. I started arguing with him, demanding he turn around. He claimed he did not know Giza, which I found unbelievable, and I began to lose my temper. I positioned myself to be ready to act and tried to figure out how to get my sister out of the car. She had removed the keffiyeh she bought in Jordan and was holding it in both hands, ready to use it if necessary. Eventually, he exited the highway and stopped by a grocery store. I got out, furious and ready to confront him, and my sister and I went inside to safety. A few Salafi men were staring, but we were safe inside the store. Looking back, I have no idea where he would have taken us, only that it would have been out into nowhere. We still talk about it, and now always make travel safety plans. Those protocols probably saved us. Story 33. When I was in college back in 2013, I had to fill out some paperwork, just routine bureaucracy. That day, a guy doing his service hours handled my forms, and apparently he developed a crush on me. I didn't even see his face. I just signed what I needed to sign and left. But he had received my documents and now had all my personal information. He began stalking me for years. He knew where I lived, where I worked, my phone number, my email, even my class schedule. He knew everything. He texted me from different numbers, followed me around campus, and even showed up at my job once, constantly calling me names for not giving him a chance to make me, in his words, the happiest girl alive. I had to go to the college principal, and security arranged a restriction order to keep him away from me. He was banned from entering the engineering building where I studied. 3 years later, he showed up at my new job and told me he had just started working in the same building, suggesting we hang out. I immediately spoke to my boss, who took it seriously, and contacted the building's security manager. Once again, he was banned from my floor. Not long after, he called me from a blocked number, screaming that I was ruining his life. I was so terrified that I quit that job. I haven't heard from him in 2 years, and I hope it stays that way forever. Please never pressure anyone who has already said no. Story 34. A few years ago, my sister dated a guy I'll call Jack. He was a Navy veteran who had seen combat. Things seemed fine at first, but she eventually found out troubling things and ended the relationship. When he left the Navy, he was struggling with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, though his behavior seemed influenced by more than just his service. He had been using hard substances behind her back and was mentally unstable. Still, she wanted to remain his friend, thinking she could help. Fast forward to last winter, I got a call from my sister late at night while she was driving. She said Jack had gotten hold of a gun and was having suicidal thoughts. She was on her way to his apartment to take the gun from him and wanted to tell me where she was going in case something went wrong. Her friend also sent me his address to keep a record. My heart was racing. I couldn't stop imagining everything that could happen. I was terrified he might hurt her or himself or both. When she got there, Jack answered the door and thankfully handed her the gun immediately. She stayed and talked with him for over an hour on the curb by her car, trying to calm him down. The whole time I was still panicking, texting her random questions only she would know the answers to make sure she was the one responding. In hindsight, that might have been over the top, but I was terrified. Eventually, she drove away safely, taking the gun with her. I think he got professional help afterward. That night still haunts me, the fear that I might have lost my sister or that she could have witnessed something irreversible. I hope he's doing better now, and I'm grateful she made it home safe. Story 35. When I was 10, my 7-year-old sister and I were staying at our grandmother's house. It was a sunny afternoon, so she decided to take us down to the river, about a 30-minute walk away. My nan lived in a rough area, but the river was near a much wealthier neighborhood filled with big houses. As we were walking downhill, a silver car pulled up beside us. The window rolled down, and inside was a man who looked to be around 60, with gray hair and one of those Bluetooth earpieces. He smiled at us, especially at me and my sister. At first, I didn't feel completely alarmed, but something about him didn't sit right. He chatted casually with my grandmother, but his eyes kept flicking back to us. The longer he spoke, the stronger the chill running down my spine grew. His smile seemed wrong. His mouth moved, but his eyes looked dead. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "You all should be careful around here. There's a man walking these parts, a real pedophile." He smiled as he said it. I felt sick. I grabbed the back of my sister's shirt and pulled her closer. I knew what that word meant. My parents had always warned me about people like that. My grandmother, clueless, just said, "Oh, really?" And the man drove off. But as we continued walking, I saw his car turn right, toward a private drive behind some trees instead of toward the main road. I never heard a door close, which meant he stayed in the car. My heart was pounding, but I stayed quiet, frozen in fear. When we reached the river and my sister went to pull off her dress to swim, I stopped her, yanking it back down. I told my nan I wanted to go home, and she must have sensed it too because she said, "It's because of that man, isn't it?"